help us in this process. This is the third of our storytelling events, and this is the best one that we've had so far. So Dr. Mullen is a political science instructor at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. He has been there for over 20 years, if I'm correct. 34 years. And he has taught numerous students. But the thing that is the most remarkable about him is that most people in political science are telling you how you should think and how you should feel and how you should vote and how you should do. And what he does is he challenges people to be their best. He challenges each and every one of us to get involved, to take part, to stand up for. And when you see injustices or whatever going on, that each one of us have a responsibility to intervene. That in order to make our community better, it requires action. And there's no action that's too small. So we are absolutely, completely honored to have him tonight to speak to us. In the course of telling stories, it's really important that we have an environment where it's safe for people to tell their stories, where they can be vulnerable to say who they are, what they're about, and even if you don't agree, that you can agree to disagree, and you can still respect this person as somebody that's valuable in this community. So we're gonna have him come forth and lead us in that discussion as far as how do we do that. Thank you so much, Dr. Mullen, for being here. Oh, before he does, I gotta do one other thing, and forgive me that I did not do it, but in the back of the room is the heart of Dr. Mullen. Dr. Dolly Mullen is here too, so we have been graced by two extraordinary people.
I'm going to use the mic. I normally don't, but I've been talking all day and my voice isn't feeling strong this evening. Please don't let this be a barrier with us. With my classes, I often walked among people, among students. And one of the things you do is you look at their notes. They don't realize you're looking at their notes, but you look at their notes. And it helps when they come into my office, because then I can talk to them about maybe clarifying things, maybe some tricks of the trade of how to follow someone who's speaking to you without necessarily engaging in conversation. And that's kind of where I'm taking you today. I thought about engaging you in a conversation, and I really do want to do that, but what I have to say to you, I want to get it out first. I just want to get it out. So if I could do that, and I'm happy to answer questions or participate in conversation afterwards. Also, you know, when I first came to Asheville, I had no intention of staying. I thought that I had just come from Nigeria, and the Nigerians were going through their second republic, and the president and his administration, the governors of the various states, were dealing in a level of, I don't know theft that was unprecedented. And so a couple of my students, this is what told me early in my career to make friends and to recognize my students as potential colleagues. Two of my students were in the military academy, their equivalent of West Point. And they had come to the university for their master's degrees, and I chaired their committees. And I chaired it as a young professor brand new out of graduate school because they were from Benin City. And Benin City was neither Igbo or Yoruba. And it certainly wasn't Hausa, where I would live. So participating in a conversation in Hausa land between Yoruba and Igbo faculty with Benin City students taught me a serious lesson about how to conduct difficult conversations. Because what it turned out is that as an African American, I was seen as a fourth ethnic group, and I was neutral. And that neutrality allowed them to funnel questions to me that they weren't quite comfortable funneling to the students. And as a result, at the end of, they both received their master's degrees, I was warned to come home. They felt I was part of the family, and they said I should come home. I should go back to the United States on my biannual home leave, It was every 2 years at the home league. And wait, because they were going to take the government. This is a major and a captain, and they said it was going to be led by the generals. And by Christmas, that's exactly what happened. So here I am in Asheville, desperately, waiting, looking, hoping, this was, looking to whether or not I should go back abroad, because in my mind, my wife and I had immigrated. We were through with the United States, at least temporarily. And because while in Nigeria, we participated in conversations, and I had associations with government that were not based on race. I was free of racism. And I didn't know how much I had adjusted to that till I came back to the United States and realized where I was again, and that I had a newborn son. And Jamal Danzaria has not been to Nigeria, his birthplace. But in doing that, another conversation comes up, and it's the personal conversation between my children and who they are. And I found that I can do that because I know them, but that's not my strength. So what I'd like to talk with you tonight about is having difficult conversations at the policy and institutional level that definitely have personal ramifications, much like my time in Monolith Downtown University in Nigeria with these military students looking at dealing with public policy, but looking at improving the government and doing illegal things to do it, a constitutional takeovers of government. And feeling bold enough to share that with me because I'm part of the family. What do I do with that information? I mean, it was a dilemma. I was young and I chewed on it, and I told everyone I knew when I got back to the United States, but I didn't open my mouth when I was there. Right? I wouldn't do that. When I came to Asheville, I learned how to open my mouth much more. As I found that here in Asheville, I was again a third party. I was again a filter because I was new. I was an African-American new in this city. And I found myself listening to the stories of African-Americans who had lived here for 3 and 4 and 5 generations, who considered themselves old Asheville. And I knew that no one was listening to them because I'm teaching at UNCA, Snow White. Yeah, I know nobody's listening to them. There's nobody mentioning, nobody's bothering to repeat the stories that I'm hearing that are like, what? Wait, what happened to you? This is living memory? Because they're sharing that living memory with me. They tell me what doctors to go to and what not to go to. My wife was pregnant. Her 4th child. Don't go there. Go there. I arrived on campus and my office was empty. There was no furniture. It was just a quirk in administrative things, I'm sure. But preparing for a full load of classes, the first year I taught 7 new classes out of 8 that were possible. And so the housekeeper came and said, "Brother, what's up?" And brought me a fold-out table and a fold-out chair so I could prepare my first lectures at UNC Asheville. Half of my classes were at night. There's nothing to it. Don't worry about that. Except every now and then, African-American students would mosey by my office 8:30, 9 o'clock at night to walk me to my car. And I didn't realize what they were doing. Just hanging out with Dr. Mullen. That's what they were doing. Maybe. And then they started sharing their stories with me. Where to go, where not to go. Back in the day, Robbinsville, Transylvania County. Back in the day, Madison County. Sheriff Ponder, remember those names? Yeah. And so you learn to have these stories that you share, sometimes you don't share, depending on the audiences. And so I didn't really know who I was talking to tonight. And so I just said, let me just say things. And often in class, I don't know who is self-selected into my classes. I just don't know. And you look at the roll, and sometimes you recognize, but maybe a quarter, a third of the students, you don't know why they're taking the classes. So, you kind of throw something out there to see. And so let me throw some things out there. But one of the things I found often is that if I use national stories, if I use regional stories, folk don't realize and can put their guards down and begin listening. And actually, I'm talking locally. You just change the names, and it fits. And so when I say things, I did this thing today. I normally don't use notes. I really do have to. When I say things like the age of Trump, and I have African-American students and Latinx students, and I have white students in my classes. Those are the dominant three groups in my classes. Sometimes I'll have Native American, Cherokee. And I say the age of Trump, I'll get different responses. I'll get the response of silence. I'll get the response of disgust. But when I say, when we're looking at issues of race, those are the topics, those are the stories most difficult to have in the age of Trump. How do you bridge that? How do you begin a discussion knowing that the object of that discussion is the son of a Klansman? You have a president who is the son of a Klansman. New York City. Look at the arrest records. Trump, arrested, Klan rally. You say, okay. It's too close to home. People don't want to deal with it. That's fine. Listen, age of Trump, let's put that aside for a second. Until you get to know me, then in class you realize your grade is not in jeopardy because you're trying to think out loud. That's okay. Just when you write it, make sure that it's a full sentence and we have examples and give me some data. But right now, just ease into it. Let's talk about the particulars of a group. And so I get this, and it came up. Just you said it. It's really funny because I didn't anticipate that. I get into a conversation with my colleagues, and rather than talk about race, folk want to talk about diversity. Rather than talk about black folk, people want to talk about something else. And then they say, it's reverse racism. Or in my student evaluations, one of my favorites early on, I guess people realize I ain't paying any attention to them, so they start writing it. But it's just, I was called a black racist. See, I can say all this now because as of June 30, I retired from UNCA. And so rather than just focusing on the city and knowing that I can have these internal conversations on campus, I figured the campus needs to come out into the community. So let me air some laundry. Yeah, being called a black racist, or I don't know how I got to be a senior professor, but the idea of reviewing the student evaluations of other professors and seeing the differences by race and by gender as I go through these evaluations, knowing that they're confidential and I can't talk about them. I had to figure out how to do that. How do you have that conversation? The evaluation of personnel by race and gender. In a community that's small enough where you can identify people, even if you use statistics. Just use myself. That's what I did. I just used myself. I just said, black racist, and what does that mean? That means that you and your humanities core are not teaching the full world truth. Truth is not just to be found in Western civilization. So what other truths can we see? And why don't you know them? Well, you don't have to know them. Hire the faculty that do know. In other words, create new specialties. Not just physics and math and chemistry, literature, language. No, let's talk about Africana studies, LGBTQ studies. Let's do that. Because these are the areas that we seem not to know the truth, as seen by particular populations, as experienced by particular populations. In other words, when you talk about diversity, my opposition is that one size does not fit all. That's a difficult thing because what I just laid on you now is that now you have to know populations by their particularities. That's the only way to solve a problem. You don't solve problems in general, you solve them specifically. You contribute to a community's strength specifically, not generally. And that's a difficult conversation to have. to talk about the Kuala boundary before the casino. You should see those stats. But my specialty was African Americans, and I just tried to open the door for others as much as I could, as much as others could. And so they hired young black faculty, African, Afro-Caribbean, African American faculty to take the retiring faculty's place. We did that. There's a core of folk on campus. They're new to the community, welcome them. Please. They're deciding whether or not they're gonna stay. They're deciding if they have a community that's healthy enough to raise their children in. Welcome them. That's just one difficulty of the conversation. I'll give you one more, just one more. And then we'll get on to some other things. Is that often in having a conversation, we expect some type of agreement and consensus. My experience has said that's an unreasonable expectation. And just last night, it came out. I'm falling asleep. Baby is just, my granddaughter has just, I barely beat her for one more night. She fell asleep before I did. So, it's just, we were at it. My wife was looking and she was ready to pick up the pieces, but, we ended up, settling on who was gonna go to sleep first. She did. Before I fell asleep, it came on. And it was there, they were reviewing this latest news, the latest scandal out of the White House. And the Democrats refused to talk about impeachment. They refused because the special investigator Mueller had not finished his investigation, so they didn't want to preempt his findings. But a comment was made in passing, talking about consensus, talking about unanimity as being unreasonable. When President Nixon resigned, 20 to 25% of the American population was his core base. They were not pleased. 20 to 25% of Americans, as scandalous as Richard Nixon's stuff was, where he had to resign before impeachment, before they actually prosecuted, 20 to 25% of the population still supported him. So when you see the base being strong, of course it's going to be strong. Don't expect consensus. That's okay. Because in a conversation, that's a fatal flaw, is to browbeat someone into believing what you believe. Fatal flaw. It won't stick. It won't stick. I remember I had to learn this as a young professor teaching African politics. And I was in the anti-apartheid movement. And I remember students being fired up because they didn't know such injustice could occur. And I was explaining some of the basics of the anti-apartheid movement, why I was anti-apartheid. And I remember a year after taking my class, sometimes after graduation, I would see these same students rationalizing the Reagan administration's policies towards South Africa. Rationalizing, well, maybe sanctions are too strong. Let's talk some more. I mean, those black students, what are they doing? They shouldn't be out there and they wouldn't get shot in their demonstrations. You know what? Are you sure that tear gas is choking infants and killing elders? Are you sure? Just within a year, soon after graduation, I often got that. Because they just caught fire and it went out. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that consensus and consistency in having positions that are commensurate with yours may be an unreasonable conversation. So this morning, it's unplanned. I'm running like a three-legged dog. I'm running, trying to get from one place to another without being ridiculously embarrassingly late, which I'm failing tremendously at because of that traffic on Patton. Anyways, I'm trying to get there. And my phone rings, and normally I don't pick it up. And this is a call I've been waiting on. I'm talking to Representative Turner. Now, Brian Turner was a student of Dr. Dolly. in middle school. Oh no! You better call me back, boy. He was a student of my wife's in middle school. So we've known them for a long time. For a long time. He said, how would the Mullins and the Turners know each other? They'll do their children. How to have a difficult conversation? Sometimes it's your children who unite you. It's just having them in the same place, playing on the same team. And you find yourself standing on the same sideline. And you get into a conversation. But I'm not good at this interpersonal stuff. Don't give me that. Let me stick with the procedural in the institution. So here we are, Brian calls me. Brian Turner, Representative Turner calls me. He has a couple of things he wants to say. Then he says, last night, he was in a town hall meeting. I'm not sharing any trust, and Brian would probably be laughing anyway. He was in a town hall meeting, I think in Biltmore Forest, and the question came up about Silent Sam. And why, what did he intend to do? What did he think about Silent Sam? So Brian calls me. First thing, yesterday he called, we finally caught up with each other this morning, and I couldn't help it. I started laughing because I just started giggling because I thought the students, that was just the funniest thing I'd ever seen. Is that, they had it planned to a T. First day of school, you get the sheets, you get the rope, and we're gonna put this up and defeat a $400,000 surveillance system they put on this Confederate monument. $390,000 surveillance system on this monument. That's what they spent on, right? And I'm laughing because they pulled it down, they figured it out. Yay, students, that's what I teach. That's you be innovative. And he said, and I realized Brian wasn't laughing back. I said, okay. What's up, Brian? He said, well, look, this is a serious historical monument. This is a tradition. This is a thing that represents so much alumni and so you have these new students coming in, these students who didn't go through the process pulling it down. What am I supposed to say about that? And I said to him, think about it. I said, thank you. I said, think about it. I said, think that's my granddaughter's routine. I sing them at night in my sleep, Sesame Street and these little toys that dig into your subconsciousness. And I said, think about it. Think about what these Confederate monuments might look like to others. Think about what Silent Sam said to folk who were oppressed and enslaved by the Confederacy. Think about that. And first, they didn't get it. I was fine. Think about that pedestal it stood on. Think about when it was erected. And in Chapel Hill, the students, grad students, dug up the commemorating speech of the man who dedicated that thing. And it was clearly, as he bragged about beating an African-American woman for insulting a white woman, not 100 yards from the site of it, and that it was proper to put it here to commemorate white supremacy. He said that. Now defend it. Now act like it's just a charm out of Gone with the Wind. Wait. I said, okay. I know that's a big thing to get into. Is as you don't represent, you're not of the community offended. I understand that. Don't pretend to be black and experience the pain. No, don't do that. Think about and he said it. That's what I like about teaching. He said, think about, you mean, this is like when I drive down I-40 and I see those gigantic Confederate flags. Said, you got it. Think about a Confederate flag in bronze on a pedestal. What does that look like? And all of a sudden, the conversation about Silent Sam becomes one of commemoration of oppression. I was going to end it with this, but I need to say it now because I don't want to forget. One of the coming ideas of, you're going to get it. It's one of the ways you bridge political, diametrically opposed political dialogue. It's using the other side of your brain. You train the other side of your brain. You train that part which is emotive. And there's very serious methods of doing it. This is not, there's nothing to denigrate candle lighting and walking in the dark. There's nothing like that. I mean, it's fine if you want to do that but this is real serious effort, classroom, I think, worthy effort, is that you learn how to be empathetic, not sympathetic, not where you're actually feeling and you accept the feelings of others, but you understand the feeling of others. There's a difference. How do you think in a way where you can understand the feelings that you've never had before? That's a hard thing to do. A hard thing to do. Because you're thinking out of both sides of your brain. And you're holding sometimes contradictory ideas. That's not easy. In other words, part of our conversation and how to hold a civil dialogue often is not logical. It doesn't flow from A, B to C, or 1, 2 to 3. Often, there are feelings that emerge. And I'm suggesting to you that what you will learn, what is coming in the academy, is how to teach empathy, how to learn empathy. Because then it's the actual ability to walk in someone else's shoes without becoming that other person, without falsely, culturally appropriating someone else's. It's a skill. And it's coming. It's coming. I'll give you another hard conversation. Hard conversation. This is race, right? This is race. This is another one. Where am I on time? Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. This is just Asheville, right? This is Asheville. There is a monolith downtown. There's a monolith downtown, and it's ironically based on an African monolith. They used to be called Cleopatra Needles, but these were monuments set up by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to commemorate major events. That's the basis of the architecture for the Zebulon Vance Memorial. It's highly ironic, and I know they didn't know that, but they might have because the Masons helped install the thing. I'm suggesting to you that's another difficult conversation to have. And we skipped over it. We skipped over it when the funds were needed to renovate or let it collapse. The county chair called me, David Gant at the time, and I suggested to him that he let it drop. He thought I was just being a radical. But he wanted something on the other end of the spectrum because he knew what he was hearing, very much like Brian. And he wanted to hear something, and I said to him, let it drop. You know, I jokingly said it'd be great performance art for the tourists downtown, but you just move them out the way, don't let it drop on them. But let it drop, because then that becomes a monument to what Asheville actually thinks about racism. Let it drop where it is. Let it deteriorate. But it was renovated, and $200,000 sunk into this thing. But the point being is that Zebulon Vance Memorial says something different to the folk who commemorated it. It says something different to African Americans. It says this is not my place. It says that Confederate monument is like flying a flag. It's a very difficult thing to have a conversation about what to do next. And even sitting someone down at the table to do that is not a small event. The monument is there. Let me give you another. Happened to me in Hill Street Baptist Church. I was there to do a Black History Month commemoration, and it was at the end of prayer meeting on a Wednesday. So I had the old ladies. Old ladies were there, and I didn't even know them. I didn't know they knew me, but they did. It was a while back, and they said, Dr. Mullen, we need to talk to you. And they're in front of the church, right below the pulpit. They started talking to me about what I-240 had done to the Black community. They started talking. It was the first conversation I had on urban renewal in Asheville. And that conversation I'm supposed to have another talk in my head, and they literally, women were crying, remembering what is no longer there. The businesses, the churches, the homes, gone, obliterated, with funds that were supposed to be used to rebuild the houses that had been torn down by other parts of urban renewal. You see, in the midst of urban renewal in Asheville, it was this removal of the blight, the installation of an infrastructure, water, sewers, and everyone agreed on that. That conversation was led by the leading liberals of the day in town. If I call some of the names, you would know them. These were liberals of the day. And in the midst of that eradication of the blight, people were moved out of homes and put in public housing and promised that they could move back into homes once the construction had taken place. Well, administrations in DC changed. It went from the Johnson administration to the Nixon administration. The Nixon administration took the bounds off of those urban renewal grants and just made them block grants. This place decided to build interstates, not homes. Folk remember that. And then that's the context of way back when a young professor and meeting people for the first time. But it's directly connected in the minds and in the attitudes and expectations of the gentrification that's happening right now. That's the context. Is that urban renewal and gentrification are the same thing. Just new mechanisms. So having difficult conversations. How do you manage that? That's not even the hardest one. You know, even the hard ones. The hard ones are the ones that come like that. One day it's looking all fine. Next day, should I go downtown? It's like the APD shootings. First one I participated in terms of the community and reconciling what's going on with a process that maybe added some justice to it was 1988, 1989. We called in, at the time, it was Institute of Civil Justice, Civil Rights. It was at Carolina, UNC Law School. They sent people here and to monitor and to look, and they made recommendations that a Citizens Review Task Force be formed with authority over personnel. Well, you see how far that went. And the shootings continued, unpredictably over the years. Try to have that conversation with the families that are left. Try to get the autopsy reports. Try to get reconciliation and recognition from APD. Try that. And I will point to you what different police chiefs have told me personally about reconciling. They're going to do their best, and I never hear from them again. We need to diversify the police force without any plan for retention. We need to have, you hire them, and then before the year's out, they're gone, because the environment is so hostile, or because they get paid more going to Charlotte. It's just, you see, part of the conversation here, community-wise, is that it's difficult because it's personal. And so what I've done over the years is try to translate that through myself, but I'm no longer an outsider. I'm Asheville now. I try to translate myself through institutions. And so my students, purely by accident, I wish I could say I planned it, but I didn't. I'd just be lying. It's just the State of Black Asheville. And the State of Black Asheville was an attempt to do what Martin Luther King had said do in reconciling difficult conversations. It's in his second book, Why We Can't Wait. And the chapter in there is the letter from a Birmingham jail. And in the letter from a Birmingham jail, he outlines the steps for nonviolent direct action. And the first step of nonviolent direct action is fact gathering. Establish that there's a problem. And so that's what I tried to do. I tried to do the State of Black Asheville, say, you know what? We got a problem over here. This is not just APD. This is general justice. This is not just, urban renewal and gentrification. This is housing. This is not just my kid not graduating. This is education. This is not just me getting sick because I like potato chips. This is healthcare. And so what are the policy outcomes? Are they racially and are they by gender disparate? And every year for 10 years, not only were they disparate in every public policy area you try to look at, but they were disparate at increasing rates over 10 years. It never, in any area, did I see it get smaller, the gap between white and black. And you pick the public policy. And I said earlier, I tried to weasel out of it about the 5th or 6th year of it. I think that's when it was. I really tried to, fix the schedule so it didn't have the class because I had to teach some other stuff. And I was, berating the students on how bad I was going to work them if you signed up for the class. So I wouldn't do it if I were you. And, I really tried to weasel out of it. And by the time I broke the news to Dr. Dolly and to another one of my seniors, they just weren't having it. They just weren't having it. And I got blessed out from, let me think, it was the gas station at Kenilworth and Tunnel, all the way to campus. I got blessed out in the nicest language that my wife could possibly get, but I heard it. My ears, all right. And so year 10 comes along, and Buncombe County and Asheville City see it finally and begin responding that this is not just a report, this is a state of our conditions living together. And so sometimes identifying the problem works. Other times, according to King, his second stage was to negotiate. Let's sit down with the people who were responsible for this to see if we can negotiate a settlement. With King, of course, it didn't work. And so the third round was self-purification. That's the third stage he's talked about. And self-purification meant you trained the people who were going to directly involve themselves to be the recipients of whatever abuse is mounted on them. You cannot respond violently, no matter how violent the reaction is to what you're doing. You cannot respond and train people. We call it self-purification. My alma mater was a training spot at Atlanta University, but it was secret. Morehouse and Spelman women, particularly college, they would go to the administration of the graduate school at Atlanta University and be trained by local people, Benjamin Mays and some other folk, on how to respond nonviolently. Here, it was ACE Corps. And there were individuals in the AfricanAmerican community who worked with high schoolers to do the same. And then the fourth stage is nonviolent direct action. You put your body out there. You put your body out there. And often it worked, many times it did not. Often it worked. There are notable times when it did not. And so what happens when it doesn't? Or is this the goal that you want? And so often I look at Malcolm X. How did he say hold a reasonable conversation? How do you dialogue? He said you can't. He said it's like talking to a wolf about being vegetarian. Yeah, a wolf is a wolf. The sheep don't discuss it with the wolves. They form a flock and go. They defend themselves. That's what you do. Because his focus wasn't a dialogue across race. His focus was a dialogue within the race. And so I didn't know who I was talking to, and I'm coming, I know time. And I didn't know what I was talking to, and I said, there might be African Americans here, and we need to talk. Because there are conversations, dialogues in the community that we have to have within the family. We have to have it behind closed doors. We have to talk to ourselves about what is it that we want and how we want it and who's going to be responsible for getting it. What do we do with ourselves in terms of self-responsibility? It's a conversation that you can't be told, this is what you do by others. You have to decide it for yourself. That's a hard thing to do because people accuse you of that self-segregation, people accuse you of all kinds of things. And my reaction to that is, since when is that a bad thing?
let's talk about the American history. Do you really know what e pluribus unum means? It means out of many, one. I just choose to interpret many as a community. Out of many communities, we form one nation. Now, how responsible are you for not helping your community? Social, economic, political, self-determining. That's what Malcolm X meant. Political, social, economic self-determination. Black power. Shocked folk up and down the line. Still, people are not ready to hear that. And I'm suggesting to you that a reasonable community conversation is simultaneous. It's not either or King, it's and King and Malcolm X. It's not either or, it's both together. Because while you're working for responsibility of institutions that your taxes and your blood, and your legacy, your lineage help build, we also are responsible for coming home and dealing with our grandchildren. That's our responsibility. I have no choice to do both at the same time. And how do you do that? How do you do it? There is no one more in need of empathy than folk who look like you. There is no one I have had a more difficult time convincing to be empathetic other black folk to black folk. That's a hard thing to hear. And once you recognize it, once you see it, you begin recognizing the legacy of enslavement, the legacy of segregation. Of course you're not going to be empathetic to something you've been taught and trained and socialized to hate. Tell me where in Asheville is blackness celebrated? Tell me where you would find a community to plug your children into. And what does that say? It says it ain't worth plugging into. It says you're incapable of building a community. It says all kinds of things that are negative to you being empathetic. Oh, this is hard. It's hard. It's hard. And as it gets hard, that's when you know you're doing the right thing. If it's easy, it ain't gonna work. Not when it comes to race in America. Not Asheville. And so I'd like to conclude with one last observation. Just one last observation. What do you do with the rise of racism? You've floated through 8 years of Obama. African Americans, no matter how much they may talk, oh, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, they floated through 8 years of President Obama's administration. It was good seeing a black man in the White House. That was good. And even if it was just symbolic in some areas, it was good. Because if you do the math, those 10 years of the state of Black Asheville with those disparities getting growing, guess what that overlaps? Obama administration. Anyway, it is good having that symbolism. But now we don't even have the symbolism. You got straight up, the encouragement of neo-Nazis during Charlottesville. You have straight up the denunciation of an entire people as rapists. And you thought that was a mistake? Look at the murder in Iowa. Was that Iowa? The young white woman died and the Mexican has been arrested for it. See what your president said about that. Was it? Yeah. See what your president said about that. What do you do with the rise of racism? How do you have a conversation with that? You have a conversation institutionally because by law, our folk are obligated to have equality outcomes. You have this conversation internally where people who are of your community can at least understand it in a way that allows for conversation among themselves if no one else wants to hear. Waiting for elections every 2 to 4 years or 6 years is getting to a point of delegitimizing the system. How many of you actually believe Congress can work properly? If you poll it as a political scientist, I'm used to it polls below used car salesmen. Congress does. It's posed below used car sales. It's in the single digits approval, except when it comes to your member of Congress. And then it goes into levels that get them reelected. So on this last note, let me say to you that there's hope. In this very building, last Thursday, because I showed up at the wrong time, it was just horrible. I came in here and there was a table, and the table was empty. I said, okay. But downstairs was Mark Meadows. He's the first member of Congress I've never met. I met Mark Meadows. So on that note, you know his little website, whatever it is, if you see a picture of me hugged up with Mark Meadows, know that a community conversation is possible and there's hope for anything.